So Robert, first of all, let me thank you very much for coming and doing this little interview with us. We're so grateful that you could take the time. You are really the great modeler in the field of NLP for sure. And like literally, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people have benefited from the tools that you have sort of brought into the world, tools for dreamers that you've brought into the world that everybody now just takes for granted on their programs. Oh yeah, we learn that model and we learn that model, not really realizing that, you've done actual real world modeling with real people who are kind of experts and excellent exemplars. And so I'm just very, very grateful to have your input for us. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you for making this such an important thing available for people. I mean, I think this is, we've always said modeling is the creative engine of NLP, and it's needed now more than ever.
Yeah, lovely. So when I think of you modeling, I've got two things in my mind. One is this thing about tools. I remember when you were modeling that lovely guy from Northern Ireland, and then we were modeling you. I think we were modeling Penny and James, modeling you, modeling him. It was quite a lot of things. But I remember that, as well as the thing that you said about, I love to create tools.
Yes.
I remember, and I think maybe I've just got it on the recording, and I really remember, it really touched me a lot when you said, there's something about modeling for you that was like an expansion of being.
Yes.
And that phrase just kind of like dropped into my spirit,
Yes.
I wonder if you'd like to say a little bit more about what modeling, your lifelong modeling, what modeling really means to you at many levels, obviously.
Right. Well, I think that's what comes to mind when you say that there are these different levels, of course, of modeling. I can simply model behavior by essentially a kind of imitating, or by osmosis trying to take something on, or I can go a little bit more deeply and model things like strategies. Oh, how did you think that, and how do you know that, and what's the sequence of processes that you go through? But you also get to some of these deeper levels, don't you? Like, well, what are the values and the beliefs that this model is carrying that's sort of driving the behavior? Sometimes what you find is that getting those beliefs or those values is the most important part. It's, that's this idea of what's the difference that makes the difference in order to produce a particular performance. And sometimes it's not the behavioral details. Sometimes it's the belief that's driving it. And then when we talk about being, there's this whole notion of, identity and, expanding what is possible for us, first for me as a person, but then also for others. And, NLP, one of the distinctive aspects, and I think this is something that John Grinder also really, sort of emphasizes strongly, that NLP-based modeling has always sort of started from this notion of a second position, not standing back and analyzing and watching and counting things, but sort of diving into the experience of who or whatever you're modeling. And that is kind of more at this being level.
Yeah.
And so then, once you can get that, that's a very sort of fundamental, deep structure, fundamental level of organization. And I know that for me, when I am, doing some kind of modeling, it's not always kind of breaking it down neatly into these different levels, but there is certainly, each one is engaged somehow. And I think the real beauty and the purpose of modeling is and should be to expand ourselves, shouldn't it? I mean, it's not just, oh, I can do this or that. It is about expanding. Now, at the same time, you were mentioning the notion of tools. So there's that kind of dual aspect. On the one hand, I'm expanding my being. But on the other hand, I've also got this grounded in this tool that I can actually, hopefully, do something with to accomplish something concrete and hopefully meaningful in the world. So you've kind of got those two, frameworks going.
I thought of a different question than I said that I would do, which is what have been some of your surprises in modeling?
Oh,
Surprises and delights in your sort of journey and sort of hero's journey of being a modeler.
that's a great question. I mean, I think it's kind of like the whole thing is sort of a surprise and a delight. I think when you really go in with a truly the sort of modeling mindset, you're not necessarily going in to confirm something that you think you already know, right? You're going in with this mindset of not knowing, the beginner's mind. So everything is like a discovery. It's a bit like a child. I've had that experience going into some familiar place with a child where it's like everything is new and exciting. But I think that's the modeler's mindset, which is, isn't this so cool? And sometimes it's just that sense of that something that I might in my normal self not even pay attention to, but through the filters of the model, it's like, wow, this is so beautiful, or this is so cool, or this is so important.
Do you have an example of that? Do you have something in particular that you kind of go, oh, that really touched me, I wasn't expecting that, or I really changed, something in me really changed when I kind of connected to that? Have you got an example of anything?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is that there's probably so many, it's difficult to sort of choose from, but I think sometimes, because there's so many interesting people and things that I've modeled. I could pick from, I think there's always, it's the sense of wonder that comes from, I guess I would say because how do I put this? A lot of times a surprise isn't a surprise because you're expecting to be surprised, I would say. But I guess, I would say that the thing that sort of really inspired me when I was doing my modeling of some of these business leaders that would not necessarily be known, their names wouldn't be known, but I know there was this one guy who was he founded like one of the biggest shipping companies in the world, transportation, and he's a Norwegian guy, and he had a very strong ego. Is like you kind of, to be in those business leadership positions, you have to have a strong ego. And yet when he would talk about this vision, it was really clear that it was totally in awe of the vision, like that was, and that really, how do I say, that touched me very deeply, that and to realize that that's probably true of a lot of really quote sort of successful people. Is on the one hand you see the the sort of strong ego, on the other hand there is this childlike wonder in what they're actually, what the thing that they're really bringing into the world is. And this guy was the same guy that also surprised me, and maybe this is another interesting example where I was asking him about solving some complex organizational problem, so he could, because he would have things happening all over the world and things needed to be coordinated, and there was different types of wars in some places and other things going on in others. And and I was asking him, well, how do you, figure this out? And he said, do you really want to know? And I said, sure. And I kind of got my, things out, expecting him to go through some kind of strategy,
Yeah. Yeah.
He said, well, basically said, well, I ride my bicycle.
Uh-huh.
And I said, what? I ride my bicycle. I get on my bicycle and I ride and I ride. And then finally, something comes to me. And what he was saying is, okay, you cannot do that cognitively. You've got to go into this somatic state that is connecting you to something that is, greater than conscious in a way. And also remember at a later time, we were talking about some other kind of challenge. And I said, oh, I'll bet you're going to have to ride your bicycle on that. And his answer was, oh, no. You can't ride your bicycle on that problem. You have to golf on that problem. And so there was this whole, that sort of really is actually one of the things that got me really interested in the whole notion of somatic syntax.
Yeah.
And again, but I guess the surprising part is it's not completely surprising that would be things that people would do. The surprising part, there was this very successful business person that was so very clear about these other aspects of what really were involved in successful performances, especially with respect to complex things. So yeah, I mean, I would say
it's a great kind of example of that kind of conscious, unconscious,
exactly,
complete sort of mind body, somatic cognitive, isn't it? Kind of utterly robust relationship with information moving in all possible directions.
Exactly.
And
I guess, like I said, it's not like people like Einstein or Da Vinci, they already talk about things like that. But I guess with that, so the surprise was, it's like, wow, well, that's not just in these particular areas like science or art, it's also in these other areas. And so that was actually very confirming. And I think it also, of course, made me all the more attentive to the fact too, then, that when we are modeling, it's a lot, the modeler himself or herself also needs to open to these other filters, because if you're just looking at something through cognitive filters, that's all you're going to see. That's all you're going to find. So we have to, when we go in to do that modeling, open to all these different potential aspects to find what is really, the mystery.
That's such a lovely story, because it's also like he really sort of shows up as just a person, doesn't he? A person who really knows what he needs to do in order to be able to kind of manifest and integrate, his processes. And
and it made me realize that probably a lot of these people who are, heads of these big businesses are not just, egoistic jerks. That there's, and maybe they are. I mean, maybe they are, but they're also more. There's more than that. There's.
But to have that dimension.
And
it's probably that human, isn't it? To be in their bodies, in the world. It's lovely.
And I think it's what kind of struck me was that it's actually that dimension that is responsible for their success. I mean, in other words, that they succeed in spite of the other things, not because of the other things, but because that dimension is what makes it all work. Otherwise, you would just be, a bull in a china shop. But to actually do something that can sustainably succeed, you have to have that dimension.
Thank you, Robert. That's really, really a beautiful, beautiful answer. Thank you so much. So my next question, really, one of the real reasons that I really so much wanted to be able to talk to you and have our people on the program kind of meet you if they haven't already, is, here we are in a world full of tremendous challenges, I think,
Yes.
and I know that you would say, and also opportunities, and the opportunities are to kind of like filter for what's really important for us right now. And I wondered if I know that you're always kind of looking around, seeking what's important, what's the next most important thing. I know you're doing a lot yourself with health modeling in
Yes.
health systems at the moment, but I wonder if there's some other things that you could speak to in terms of who and what are really going to be urgent right now for us to bring the skills and tools of modeling, and sort of capture some of these, different dimensions of what is really can work in the opportunities that are possible.
Yeah.
To meet
I
the
think,
challenges, of course, as well.
yeah, I mean, I think, for me, there's sort of several different ways to answer that. One is,
Yeah.
there's three kind of main themes that I think are always going to be important during challenging times, but especially these. And, the first one is resilience,
Yeah.
so modeling how we, who is able to stay resilient, who is able to, bounce back, get through, stay flexible, adapt. And I think then, secondly, that goes along hand in hand with this notion of generativity. So modeling how, who and how new possibilities are generated, and maybe another term for that is emergence. So how does something emerge, which is means it's non-linear, that stuff comes in sort of goes into the soup, as it were, but then something really powerful comes out. So that it's a type of creativity. And the third thing I think that's of course always important, and I think it's important at this time, and it relates to these other two as well, is inclusivity. And I mean like inclusivity versus divisiveness, right?
Yes.
We have such a time now where there's so many perspectives, and when things polarize, really creates a lot of destructive, our potential for destruction and harm is so great. So how do we how can we include all the opinions, all the perspectives in a way that they don't create violence or aggression? And that's and it's kind of like making space for it all. And I think that's a big challenge, obviously. Now then, how do we do that? Those are the themes. For me, one of the things that I have sort of been evolving or developing, or including more in my own modeling career, is moving from modeling single individuals to modeling ecosystems. So meaning that it's not an individual, but it's a pattern within a system. And this is something that I think one of our mutual mentors, inspirations, Gregory Bateson, was really also attempting to do, is this kind of systemic modeling, which is not necessarily completely different than modeling an individual, but the focus is certainly somehow different. So as you know, one of the projects that I've been on is working with is modeling the healthcare ecosystems, and saying, well, when something like healthcare is working well, not just what's happening in an interaction with one person and another, but how is an ecosystem supporting that? And then I'm also, though, I've been talking with somebody about doing this very interesting project where we would pick, people who are doing interesting things in interesting interesting fields, people like Ken Wilber or Oprah Winfrey, or people who are doing things, and we actually would do kind of an ongoing broadcast modeling of them, which I think would be then very interesting, because this would mean like modeling publicly, because so often modeling is done on a more private or individual basis, or takes time to sort of sift through things, whereas this would be kind of like in the these modeling programs where somebody's modeling me modeling or whatever. But I think that could be an interesting thing to bring modeling into public awareness as something really interesting and useful, and sort of showing people how to do it. So the idea wouldn't be just, well, here's my idea of what this person does. It's how can we kind of bring modeling into public awareness as something that everybody can do, and it's a way of thinking about something. So that's kind of what I'm also, those are sort of
and also a deep way of getting of understanding and appreciating all these different points of view and perspectives, as you say, that come under the kind of how to actually be inclusive when there's all this kind of division and difficulty and polarization. I was just reading something, funny enough, there was a letter in the Financial Times by somebody talking about schismogenesis. And they had a really neat little way of talking about they called it when there's negative reciprocity. And I thought that was a very kind of catchy little way to just go, so the more this, the more that, and then you get that kind of divisiveness. But public modeling, like really the invitation is to step on into all perspectives, isn't it? And kind of, absorb and integrate and deeply appreciate how each perspective has sort of come to be and to be felt. But then to have something more to kind of be able to step back and work with the kind of spirit of modeling to produce something that helps to organize that.
Well, that's what you're saying is really interesting, because it reminds me of these experiments that I've read about that they do with what's called, radical compassion. Or where you have people that have really different views, like somebody who is, gung-ho with guns, and somebody who is,
not so gung-ho,
or who's lost very strongly, somebody who's lost a family member due to gun violence or something. And what they do is they interview each other, and you then present to the audience the other person's story. You don't have to you don't have to agree with it, but you have to be able to tell their story.
I've done a little bit of that.
But I think the part that you're adding is then the sort of stepping back to this, the third position, we would say, in NLP, which is kind of that bit more of the, that it's necessary in modeling, so in one part of modeling is I have to sort of really dive in and this, like we were talking about, this expansion of being, getting into that without any preconceptions, without really any filters yet. But then ultimately, I've got to get to that place where I do start filtering, what is the difference that makes the difference? What is necessary, but not sufficient? Those are the types of things then that are where the practicality and the ability to pass it on to others becomes important. Because if I only have that sense in myself, I've absorbed it up, but that's great, I can do it, but that doesn't mean anybody else can do anything yet. And that's the tool part. The tool part is, well, how can I turn this into something that I can explain or express or to get, show to somebody else so they can do it too. And that's, I think,
a way that it's accessible and doable for somebody else, and they want to, and they want to do it. And they see how it would expand their being, kind of thing. It would make a difference for them in a deep deep way and a behavioral way, you know, kind of deep
Yes.
and a light way, you know, it makes all the differences.
Yeah, yeah. It's that, I think that's that interesting thing. It's the deep structure and the surface structure.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's the being
yeah,
and the behavior.
yes, yeah,
And that's what's great about,
yeah,
I think, NLP. It's not just philosophizing,
yes,
nor is it just about, you know, pragmatically hammering away at something. It's
yeah.
that
I love
both of
that.
those.
So resilience, emergence,
Resilience, emergence, and yeah, that
kind of
whole notion of inclusion.
inclusion and public modeling. This kind of
Yeah,
idea of bringing awareness into public situations, that
right.
that modeling is not only possible but fundamental and enriching and
Yeah.
necessary for all of us.
I mean, imagine, you know, again, that I think about this would be an interesting thing. Imagine if everybody in the world
Yeah,
had the capability to model
yeah,
and looked, you know,
amazing.
looked at
Yeah.
things as modelers. So instead of,
Yeah,
you know, remember, you know, one of the great things that modeling gives people is that instead of looking at somebody else and feeling jealous, you know, you go, well, I can do that too. You know, I'm going to go find out how they do that. Or,
yes,
right, you know, you
yeah,
never have
yeah,
to feel less of or feel
yeah,
worn down. You know, it's like,
yeah,
well, I can go out and find out what that's like
yeah,
and how
yeah,
to do that as well.
yes,
And if there's something that somebody's doing that we don't understand or we don't like, then modeling it, saying, well,
yeah,
how is it that that person is
yeah,
perceiving this differently?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that's that third position that we're talking
yes,
about. That's the integrating position.
yes,
I think that's what allows us to have that inclusivity, is the meta position. Instead of being in one position
yeah,
or the other, I can
yeah,
actually, it brings me
yeah,
to that meta position. And then once you can hold all of these diverse perspectives,
yeah,
then the polarities become complements, and then something can actually
yes,
emerge that's new.
yes.
So I think these are
That's
some of
lovely.
the really key things that our world is needing right now.
I love that.
Mm,
Thank you so much, Robert. That's absolutely lovely. Thank you.
you're welcome.
I mean, also what came to me just then was um, the idea of it kind of humanizing us as well. I tell you what came into my mind. Do you know that Pema Chodron? You know,
Yes.
it's a Tibetan Buddhist thing where, you know, you feel you're all alone, or you feel something, and then you realize in the world there are literally, you know, thousands of other people feeling exactly the same. It's
Way.
got that sameness as well as difference quality to it, I think.
Exactly.
And I think that's where it's so touching, isn't it? Where you can go, oh yes, I've, you know, as well as learning something new
Yeah.
and being surprised and going, well, I really didn't know that anybody could even think like that. That's amazing. There's also where you find, oh yes, of course, you know, that's human and that's like me and you're like
Yeah.
me, you know.
You know, and I was thinking about this with respect to what we were saying about this young man, you know, diagnosed as
Yes.
schizophrenic, psychotic. Actually, I remember many years ago in a program I was doing with Ed Reese in, I think it was in Switzerland somewhere.
Okay.
Anyway, there was this woman there who was kind of having these psychotic
Right.
episodes, and you know, was bothering everybody else in the group. But I remember actually having this interesting conversation with her, sitting down and just, if you know, looking at a group of people
Yeah.
and just sort of saying, well, you know, when I look at these people, this is what happens for me. I see this, I feel that, I think this. And actually, it was a very powerful thing, because on the one hand, I could understand better, you know, so how it, you know, so in other words, instead of just going,
Yes.
somebody's schizophrenic or they're psychotic, you're going, how is that happening? That's the modeling question.
Yes. Yes.
How is that? What
Yeah.
experience is going on
Yeah.
that's different from mine?
Yeah.
And now the other thing is, by sharing that, I could also
Yeah.
offer other alternatives,
Yeah.
so you could see these same people and go
Yeah.
this direction instead of that
Yeah.
direction.
Yes. Yes.
Now, and I think that's the same thing
Yeah.
that would be so interesting to do with people who are, in these divisive
Yes.
places.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
so what is it that,
Yeah.
how do you arrive where
Yeah.
you're arriving? Not what do you think and how that I have a different opinion, but
Yeah.
how is it that you're
Yeah.
getting to
Yeah.
that place?
Yeah.
And
I
then
think
you can have the alternatives along the way.
exactly. And also you can, I see it more like a kind of continuum in a way. I read a great book, I'll let you go in a moment, but a great book called Madness Explained, which was, wonderful,
Sounds great.
by a sort of psychiatrist many years ago. And he just explained how the sort of, it's a bit like in NLP, we say we've all got the same nervous system, and it's like kind of deletion, distortion, generalization, or what's now called cognitive bias. We're all literally kind of hardwired to go along certain lines, confirmation bias and things like that. So even something like paranoia, we're all wired to be able to be paranoid,
Right.
And so it's only that person's gone further down that road than me and don't do reality testing,
Exactly,
like
yeah.
I do. But it's not something that I don't know.
Yes.
If you see what I mean. I think again, it's a bit like almost an analog submodality rather than a digital one.
Yes, right. And I think that it's that level of checking in, groundedness.
Yeah.
I think, as Deborah would say, it's also that capacity to be able to be with the uncomfortable things that are going to come up.
Right.
And
yes,
because there's this sort of whole spiritual bypassing aspect,
yes.
being able to,
yes,
and I think that's what resilience is about, being able to be with the uncomfortable reality of what is. Stay in that discomfort. And I think that's also why people end up being divisive. They don't know how to stay in this place where it's like,
I agree.
I've got these two things in there and they don't, it's not resolving, but if I can hold it long enough or add some other perspectives, then that new possibility comes out. So it reminds me of, Gregory's thing, one of his beautiful statements where he said, wisdom comes from being together and truthfully confronting our differences without the intent to change anything. And it's that, that's where the emergence comes from, because then something has this possibility to suddenly come out in some non-linear way that I think is so.
I like your thing that you do. I'll let you go in a moment. I know you've got to go. Where you do that sort of, it's both you and Steve, isn't it? Do that kind of like weaving between, the kinesthetic kind of dancing between the two things. I really like that. And it came up in something else I was reading, which now can't come to mind, but just absolutely lovely. Absolutely lovely.
I think that gives me this interesting thing. Wouldn't it be great if in these, because this is where I think things get so off, social media, that's all this just primarily verbal stuff. If you actually just said to, I don't know, a Donald Trump, show me with your body what it is that that you want, and then somebody else,
what you
go
need
with your body, and then you could begin to have this dance.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be amazing to see that. Let's dance this through, so. And where's the crash? So I see a lot of crash in that. Let's bring some little bit more
kind of like
movement.
free that
So
out.
you can still hold exactly the content, but let's bring it into something. That would be the interesting thing. I think that, the somatic is the key to, this type of generativity that we're talking about.
I agree. Lovely. It's absolutely gorgeous to see you.
Same
Lots
here.
and lots of love. Love to Deborah.
Love to you. Thank you.